Hey, what's up? Dave with Brazos Barbell. So since I started working with reactive training systems, one of my favorite things that we started doing was implementing what would be called pivot weeks or pivot blocks instead of a traditional deload. And I started my first week with reactive training systems with a traditional pivot, coming off of the World's prep and then heading into what would be a new prep into Raw Nationals. We started with the pivot. So I'm going to go over what the objective is with pivot blocks, why they're different than deloads, and really why I've loved these so much. And really this was the first thing that I started to implement with all of my clients. So first off, the goal of a pivot is essentially the same thing as what a deload would be, in that we've just run a big block, we've reached what we think is a peak training status during that block, or we've maxed out the adaptive energy that we have in that current block. And so we need to do something to get ourselves back into a training state to be able to provide more overload. So traditionally what people do is they run a sort of, let's say, an easier week of what the block that they were just doing. This is something that I've done. I think pretty much everybody has done the traditional deload, where you follow a pretty similar schedule as far as exercise selections, potentially even loading. You know, the common recommendations for deload weeks are to reduce training volume but keep your intensity high. So you may follow the exact same pattern, just cutting out some sets or cutting out some reps and those kind of things, but really keeping a lot of the stimulus the same. In a pivot week, the idea is going to be the same, but with a much more aggressive approach in trying to get back the sensitivity to training. So instead of my normal training, where in the developmental block, I was doing squatting on Mondays, deadlifting on Tuesdays, squatting on Thursdays, and deadlifting on Fridays, it changed completely. So I went from doing low bar and sumo deadlifts to I switched to doing only high bar and conventional deadlifts early in the week. And then my primary squat movement on Thursday was a safety bar, split squat, and then some rows at the end of the week for my back volume. So this is something that I think is at first, when I was hearing that Mike and the reactive training systems guys did this, I just thought, what's the difference? If the goal is going to be essentially the same, to just reduce training fatigue, then let's just keep doing it the way that I've always been doing it. Since actually doing it, I found some really, really good positives, and this is one of the biggest reasons that I've started to implement it with my own clients. So when we're thinking about deloads, the risk is going to be really low. So what's the difference? If I'm doing a pivot versus a regular deload, the risk of actually creating some subpar training is not nearly quite as high. So if we're not worried about having some potentially subpar training, then there could be some advantages to be had. So some of the major advantages is going to be that by rotating exercises, we can really increase sensitivities to some of the exercises that we are not doing, specifically stuff like competition deadlifts, low bar squatting, competition bench press, all of the ones that we really care about. So by removing those during the week, the pivot week or the deload week, whatever, when we come back to our normal training, those things should be a much more positive stimulus. It's something that we're going to respond to a little bit better. I think the fear there is that people will lose more of their training than they really will. And this was probably my main hesitation to it at first, in that I knew that this was something that Mike recommended a whole lot of, and I just never thought that it was something that was really valuable. And I'd say a lot of it was the fear that I was going to stop low bar squatting, stop doing my sumo deadlifts, and then come back and I was going to have some really bad training because of it. But I think the opposite happened, was that I enjoyed my training a whole lot more during the pivot weeks. So instead of doing the same old competition stuff and really feeling like it was basically a wasted week. So during normal deloads, I think we all come into those weeks knowing it's a deload week, I just need to go through the motions, blah, blah, blah. By rotating all of the exercises and giving me things that I really don't do, it becomes a whole lot more enjoyable. So I found myself enjoying the training, even though it was terrible things like high rep sets and tempo squats and those kind of things. I really enjoyed what I was doing, and I enjoyed having a new stimulus, but more so just a new challenge during those weeks. So I think just that I was training harder than what I would have otherwise just from emotional, psychological investment into the training. When I came back to the normal training, I found that I felt much more fresh. I still felt kind of invested, and I didn't quite have the same kind of lag that I would have had trying to get myself going for a new block again. So I think the rewards very much outweigh the risks. If the idea of that week is just to get fresh, then the deload will probably accomplish that. But if we don't rotate the exercises, there's still a chance that we come in with some of those wear and tear injuries that we had when we started. And then we don't necessarily get the big benefits of the enjoyment of that week. And for sure, just the training stimulus itself might not quite be as strong. So it is important when you're doing this to make sure that you are still following the principles, that you shouldn't go in and just kill yourself with bodybuilding workouts and those kind of things, because those can be stressful. So it is important to set it up in a way that's smart and that's going to be actually recoverable, and that you feel better after these weeks than when you were doing your traditional training. So hopefully that's helpful. I think the implementing pivot weeks is something that everybody can implement. We're all already doing deloads anyway, so maybe try this structure instead of the structure that you've been doing. So hopefully that video was helpful. If you like it, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you next time.